Welcome back to another episode of C3. I'm Courtney Groskin, and I'm here with
Sandy Heiser.
Sandy. What's new in your world?
Oh man, we just got back from spring break. It was lovely. What about this warm weather we're having?
Yeah, I stayed here, and I was starting to look like, oh, it's not going to be nice. And then it ended up being like the nicest week ever.
Yeah, we went down to Mexico and came back, and Colorado was hotter than it was in Mexico.
Crazy.
I know. And now it's just going to be a race to the finish.
It is the downhill slide
These next weeks.
and if you're like me, I begin to live more so in next year than the current year, and that really messes with me.
Yeah, totally. It's such a great time to plan for next year already.
Lots of planning conversations.
Yes.
Today, we have Joellen Killion joining us on the podcast. Joellen is an internationally recognized expert in professional learning and educator effectiveness with decades of experience in education. She has dedicated her career to improving teaching quality and student outcomes through high-impacted professional development. Joellen is a former senior advisor at Learning Forward, where she helped shape global standards for professional learning, and she has worked extensively with schools, districts, and policymakers to implement systems that support continuous educator growth. A prolific author and thought leader, her work focuses on ensuring that professional learning leads to measurable improvements in both teaching practice and student success. Welcome, Joellen. Well, Joellen, we'd love to welcome you to C3. A lot of our listeners are familiar with your work and have been following you for a long time. Can you just catch us up and tell us a bit about your background?
Well, I have been in this field for a very long time, maybe even longer than many of your listeners are old. I began as a teacher. I think I started teaching at 5 when I played school all the time. But following my years of teaching, I was a district and school administrator. I found that work rewarding. Usually I focused on curriculum and instruction. I moved into professional learning because curriculum and instruction is really nothing more than professional learning, building people's skills and expertise and knowledge around the disciplines they're teaching. And then I realized that a lot of the work that was going on in professional learning just sort of stopped at the end of the events. There was not much more. And that's when I started shifting into recognizing the importance of classroom-based support, help people take their learning and put it into practice. And so coaching became a part of the work I was doing. Even though I started coaching when I was teaching, I was a peer coach for many, many years, mentor to a lot of teachers. But I found that my real niche lately in helping district administrators, school administrators, and coaches get on the same page in terms of what they wanted to achieve, what they called success, how they work together to complement each other's work. And that's where I've been spending a good deal of my time in the last maybe 10 years or so.
Well, you've long advocated for the importance of coaching as a form of job-embedded professional learning. How do you define the coach's role in building collective efficacy across either a school or a district?
Well, as you both know, my colleague Cindy Harrison and I defined the 10 roles of coaches. And we did that because we realized that coaches were trying to do everything and anything for everybody. And so we wanted to try to categorize a bit what those little pockets of work looked like as a way of helping people prioritize what coaches would do in a way that would align with the school goals and district priorities. So we recognize that perhaps the most important role a teacher or a coach plays is supporting a teacher in the classroom implement the best high-quality instructional strategies to promote student learning. That's kind of, for me, the I think, linchpin role of coaches. Although I do find that there are some coaches in some school systems who do very little of that. They spend a good deal of their time mentoring. They work exclusively with new teachers, for example. Many of them serve as facilitators of PLCs, and they spend their whole day facilitating PLC meetings with little classroom-based support. They spend a lot of time planning instruction and assessment and intervention and doing data work with teachers. So as we think about those 10 roles, what we encourage districts to do is to look at what the primary purpose and goal of coaching is in that school system, and then choose from the 10 roles the roles that would be prioritized to support that work. Let me give you a quick example. One of the districts I'm working in right now has really prioritized literacy learning and are implementing a new literacy program. So while I recognize that roles such as school leader or mentor might be important, what is really important is that coaches are learning facilitators, helping teachers in their schools learn about the new literacy program, classroom supporters going into classrooms and helping teachers address challenges, problems, or learn how to implement the new program, and also to be working with data so they can monitor and progress monitor how students are progressing with the new literacy program so they can make adaptations in instruction. So when we know what the overarching purpose and goal of coaching is in our school or district, then we can choose which roles to prioritize. That doesn't necessarily keep a coach from doing some other related roles, but it certainly helps a coach know where to spend the majority amount of their time and effort in supporting teacher and teacher growth in order to achieve student growth.
I just love that because when coaching, when it's not successful in a school, I bet it always comes back to something along the lines of, is there a match of the need to the school? And has there been intentionality to really match the coaching need with those 10 roles to the culture of the school and what the school needs? And, has that been thought out or hasn't it? So I love that. It's so important.
Yeah, and it's really important for the coach to know that, because if you're assessing your impact, if you're not clear on what your role is, it's really hard because you're going to have a lot of scattered data of what you're spending your time doing versus when the administration is really clear, the school has a goal and you're working towards that. It's very easy to see those through lines of impact.
Exactly. Alignment, coherence, through lines, those are words that really resonate with me.
In your view, what distinguishes transformational coaching from other forms of professional development, and how can schools ensure it leads to lasting instructional change?
I think we were just talking about that. It's the kind of coaching that changes people's minds as well as their behaviors. I think a lot of coaching has focused on behavior without sufficient attention to that mindset. That's so important to sustain those instructional changes. When coaches are helping teachers, for example, they might be modeling a new strategy related, for example, to one of the math practices. And teachers can pick up those strategies. They can implement those strategies. They can replicate or imitate However, if the mindset associated with those practices is not altered, meaning, do we truly believe that students are capable, that productive struggle is a good thing, that finding the learning pit and resting in it a while is healthy, that students can be responsible learners, that failure is a way to support learning, some of those mindset issues, then we won't find instructional coaching being transformational. And I think coaches struggle with that partly because they are good teachers and they are selected, hired to become coaches because they were often master teachers. And so they have a hard time losing that identity of teacher, meaning they have a hard time letting people fail. They have a hard time giving up telling people how to do things and what to do. They have a hard time stepping out of the role and letting the teacher take the forefront because they're teachers. And so transformational coaching requires coaches to be coaches, not master teachers. And that transition is a difficult one. And honestly, I have worked with teachers who've become coaches who cannot give up being teachers. And so they're always serving as consultants and hardly ever as coaches. And that, I think, has an effect on the integrity of a coaching program. Unless the coaching program has as its defined goal that coaches will be consultants. And there are some that have defined that as their ultimate purpose.
Well, you kind of transitioned a little bit into our next question, which is just speaking of mindset shifts. You're talking about coaches making that mindset shift. But what maybe are there other shifts you can think of that coaches or leaders need to make to ensure that coaching is truly collaborative and growth oriented?
One of the ones that I think is important is the shift for leaders to see coaches not as fixers or rescuers. And that's a really hard one, I think, for coaches sometimes to let go of, but it's also very hard for leaders to let go of. And as a result, leaders look at coaches as the person who can fix the problems with instruction. They sometimes do it in roundabout ways, but a really good experience I had, I think, tells this story very well. I was in a room of principals and coaches sitting side by side, and I asked them to point their fingers at the instructional leaders in their school. Everyone in the room, almost everyone, pointed their fingers at the coaches. Principals abdicated and do abdicate. I don't think it's a malicious kind of thing. I don't think I don't think they even think about the consequence of it because they are so overwhelmed with so much compliance management things these days that they rest easy knowing they have a competent instructional leader in their coach. And so they defer to the coach. So that's a mindset that needs to shift. And it's a mindset that needs to shift both for the coach as well as for the leaders. If coaches believe they're responsible for high quality instruction and perceive themselves as the people whose job it is to fix instruction, then we're going to have systems that are going to probably not grow at the rate we want them to grow. So that's another mindset, the one about really believing deeply in the power of reflection and the power of reflective conversations, and coaches being patient enough to allow reflection to happen rather than jumping in too quickly to fix problems. That's a big one for me, and one I think that really needs attention. I think there's probably others, but those would be the two big ones I'd put on the table for people to consider.
Yeah, we move so quick in education. You feel like there's such an urgency to a lot of things that are happening in schools, and it's easy to fall into that trap of like, I've got to put the fire out. But I had an assistant superintendent I got to work closely with, and he'd always say, like, there's no emergencies. Like, just step back and take.
Lovely. Yeah. So many think we do have emergencies.
It
And we
feels
do.
like it.
We do. Our students are our emergencies. However, if we're not thoughtful and intentional with our practice to address whatever learning needs our students have, we can be wasting time by doing things over and over and over again. And if we were to approach our work with that thoughtfulness, that intentionality, deliberate planning, deliberate degrees of practice to ensure students get to a point of being independent wherever our standards expect them to be, it's that kind of forward thinking. And we do hold the mindset, I'm the last best opportunity these students have. I know so many teachers who hold that mindset.
Yeah, there's a lot of pressure there.
Yeah, there is. There is.
As districts face increasing demands on time and resources, what are some of the non-negotiables for launching and sustaining an effective coaching program that truly impacts the teaching and the learning?
Well, I have talked about this in Coaching Matters with my colleagues, Chris Bryan, Heather Clifton, and with Cindy in the first edition, and then with Chris and Heather in the second. We outlined a framework that we think is really essential and non-negotiable. And the first element of that framework is to know the purpose of coaching, to know the goals that are expected from coaching, and to define what coaching is in our context. I think it's not a smart idea for people to just grab onto a school of coaching and use it without some careful attention to what is it we want to accomplish here in our district and then in each of our schools. It starts at the top. So those are the first components of the framework. And then we are very thoughtful about choosing the roles that will be essential to support those goals, whatever that goal is, whatever that definition is, to begin to think about which roles are priority roles and use those roles to create the job description. And from the job description, we then hire people who not necessarily have the skills yet, but who have the mindset that we would associate with a coach. And this is a place, I think, to be thoughtful about recognizing that some teachers can never give up being teachers and may not be good coaches. So we hire with that mindset in place and know that it's necessary to develop the competencies of being an effective coach in the roles we've defined to align with the goals we've established. Then we place them. We make sure that we have a system of monitoring their work, monitoring the kind of work they're doing, the quality of work they're doing. We evaluate the coach and we evaluate coaching, and we have systems to do both of those things. Coaches that whole system of performance evaluation. We can't evaluate a coach using teacher standards. We need standards for coaches that are aligned with their roles, that are aligned with the goals, and to evaluate them, performance, goals, and that whole system. But we also are looking at coaching and measuring the effectiveness of coaching, and that's a much broader process. And we do that on an ongoing basis so that we are continuously upgrading coaches' skills, competencies. We're upgrading the program so that it's keeping up with what we wanted to accomplish. And we have a system of intervening when there are challenges. So if a coach and a principal are not on the same page, we make sure that we have a system to intervene, to do some negotiation or facilitation or conflict management if that's the case. Or we need to do some skill development of teachers or principals around how to make the most of coaching. That needs to be built in. So those are some of the key features of that framework. Too often, in too many schools, people have hired coaches and thrown them into schools and then said a year or 2 or 3 later, I wonder why we're not seeing the results we expected. Well, when I ask about those results, they're all over the board. Nobody defined them. Coaches are doing what they think is best. And from coach to coach and school to school, what they're doing that they think is best is not aligned. So the equity of opportunity for coaching is very erratic. So those pieces, that framework was missing. And I would say what's non-negotiable is a really strong framework.
You are so right. I can't. I've seen the scenario that you're talking about where it doesn't go well, and the coach. Another thing, it seems like absent direction or a framework, the coach then goes and finds the willing, which those are people who are interested in learning and working with the coach. And then where's the systemic approach? Where's the equity that you talked about?
Yeah. Yeah. I find one of the key pieces of the equity of coaching, equity of access to coaching, equity of opportunity is leaders, whether they're district leaders or school leaders or both, being crystal clear about the expectations related to participating in coaching. And that goes all the way back up to defining coaching and establishing the goals of coaching and making it clear at those early stages whether coaching is for new teachers, coaching is for teachers who are struggling, coaching is for everyone. We want to be crystal clear. And my friend, colleague, Jim Knight and I will often tussle back and forth about whether coaching is mandatory or voluntary. And of course, Jim believes that it is important. It's important for teachers to have a choice. They have a choice about the kind of support they receive. I land on it this way. If your board has adopted a mathematics or science or literacy or PE set of standards and program, it's not optional. It's not optional whether I, as a classroom teacher, teach those standards or use that program. And I think the same thing is true with coaching. Everyone has an opportunity to learn and grow, not necessarily in the exact same way, but I should have an expectation of engaging with the coach minimally a certain number of times a year in ways that contribute to the school's goals as well as my own professional goals.
Well, Joellen, someone with your breadth and depth of experience, we are wondering, how has your thinking about instructional coaching evolved over the years, especially as we consider the growing influence of AI, personalization, and the changing expectations for teachers?
Yeah, it has changed dramatically, and it's still changing. Surprisingly, a district I've been working with went from subject-specific coaches to instructional coaches, and now they're back to subject-specific coaches. And so, we're still doing the revolving door kind of thing. Coaching began a long time ago. Back in the early 80s, I was coaching at the end of the 70s in a program that was really focused on building teacher capacity. My principal wanted me to fix the broken teachers back then. But what we recognized is that when teachers were in each other's classrooms, that peer coaching model, that we could see a culture shift in our schools. And so my introduction to coaching started with fix the broken teachers, then into organizing, managing, and participating in peer coaching, then shifting into a more coaching as a means for induction and mentoring, to a subject-specific kind of coaching that was related to a new curricular program. And I think there are many, many school systems and even states today that sit with that kind of coaching. We also see a lot of general instructional coaching still occurring, recognizing that good teaching is made up of a set of practices and principles, and it does not matter what the discipline is. We adapt those practices to align with the standards, but any good coach can coach engagement, for example, or student responsibility, or building assessment, student-centered assessment practices in virtually any discipline. Let the teacher be the discipline expert. But I think our evolution today is sadly, where I'm seeing it, is a budget-driven issue.
Mm.
We're seeing a lot of programs across the country where coaching is now dependent on budgetary issues. It's coaches' positions are being cut because budgets are being cut. And I think that is a really sad movement. I understand it, keeping teachers in place and keeping class sizes reasonable. However, it is that support that teachers are receiving through that job embedded at the elbow, personalized to what's going on in my classroom with my students and my needs, that helps us keep teachers engaged, keeps them motivated, keeps their level of effort and energy, level of engagement high, so that we are able to retain the best of the best teachers. So I'd say coaching in general is all over the place. I've seen it in all kinds of different structures. I want to just emphasize that there needs to be a set of clear purposes, goals, and a definition that operationalize coaching within a school system so that it is contributing to the needs and the priorities of that school system. Otherwise, I think it's really hard to justify the investment in coaching, and we know that investment is a substantial one.
Yeah, we're fortunate in St. Vrain that we have a really clear vision of coaching, and my supervisor, David Baker, is a big fan of your work, and I'm hearing a lot of things that you're saying that align with the way our team works. But, we all believe in the power of coaching and that it's a wonderful support for teachers, but it has to be intentional and we have to be really clear that everyone is on the same page with it.
And we have to know it's making a difference for students. If we don't know that, and, I stress that so often, we can have teachers who are just gushing over having coaches support and just so grateful for their coach. But if we're not seeing practices change in classrooms, we're not seeing opportunities for students to learn change and positive effects in student learning, then we have a mismatch somewhere. And sometimes that means that teachers are not going to be as excited because there's going to be some dissonance that created. And maybe that's another mindset thing I could have talked about earlier. We all need to understand that dissonance, discomfort is the space for growth. And so I want teachers to say they're being pushed hard by their coach. They're really being called to question about their decisions. They want teachers to say that their coach makes them uncomfortable. I want that. And if coaches are always working to keep harmony and peace and that level of comfort, we know what we call that. We call it coaching light. And it's not going to affect student learning.
Definitely.
So true.
We're going to move into our rapid fire portion. So in about 30 seconds or less, what's one strategy every coach should have in their back pocket?
That's an easy peasy thing for me to answer. 10 seconds, listening.
If you had 60 seconds with a new teacher, what's one thing you'd tell them?
I wouldn't tell them anything. I would ask what they want. What do they want from their student and how will they get there?
I love it. Leading with those coaching questions, as always, bringing us back to the importance of asking as a coach. But we appreciate your time today and all the knowledge you shared with us. I think we could spend all day talking about coaching.
I could indeed with you because you know what good coaching is. And you are so fortunate to work in a school system that is so grounded in all of that framework is in place in St. Vrain. And I'm grateful to the work that you all have done to make that happen. You really do stand out as a school system that supports coaching. But I want to call to question, not to question, but to call up one of the school districts here in Texas, Katy Independent School District. Every year they adopt a theme for their coaches. And this year, their theme is empower over enable. And it's the theme that has really struck a chord with me, and it did with the coaches as well, because the coaches are realizing that they spend a good deal of time enabling unintentionally, but from that rescuer perspective. And when they recognize the importance of empowering over enabling, I think that can be transformational for teachers and students.
How neat. I love that theme.
David, if you're listening, we're going to start having a yearly coaching theme.
Exactly.
It's a good one. And it's one that I think will resonate with many, many coaches and teachers as well, because it honors teachers' capacity. It honors their expertise and encourages coaches to really extend that expertise.
How can we learn more from you and with you?
You can always reach out to me personally. I welcome people to just send me an email. J.P. Killion, Killion, @mac.com or gmail.com. I love getting those inquiries, those questions from people. I'm happy to answer questions, although you can be sure that before I answer a question, I will have many questions I want answered first.
Absolutely. We would expect nothing less. Well, thank
Been
you
great.
so much for taking the time with us today.
Thank you. I'm honored to have the opportunity to talk coaching with you.
It was an honor for us to talk to Joellen about coaching. She reminds us about the power of coaching and how important it is for educators. But it's also important that we have a clear understanding of the role and our coaching system. What's your coaching system? Are you clear on your impact? Thanks for listening to another episode of C3. Be sure to follow us on social media. C3, connecting, coaches, cognition. Whose thinking will you mediate today?